yoga in the modern times. This starts roughly around 1850. This is a very exciting period. Middle of 1800s, exciting things were happening in India. The entire Indian tradition was being questioned and brought into the modern times. This started in Bengal. It was called the Bengal Renaissance. And it moved on to another eastern region of India, which now is known as the state of Maharashtra. It moved there, and within 20, 30 years, every aspect of Indian historical legacy was examined, and yoga moved into the modern times. What happened there? During this time, there emerged three important yoga schools. One was in Mysore, which was, all of these were kingdoms back in the day. One was in Mysore, and it was headed by a teacher named Krishnamacharya. He was a Vedic scholar, and it is said that he went to Tibet and got trained in yoga there. But it's also fairly certain that he went to Sringeri and got trained in yoga there as well. Another school started in Rishikesh in northern India by Swami Shivananda and his disciples. So if you've heard of Swami Vishnu Devananda, for example, Swami Satyananda Saraswati, and of course Swami Chinmayananda, they are all disciples of Swami Shivananda. It's another major yoga school. And in Bengal, there were several teachers that came in the same period. In the larger yogic sense, of course, there is Swami Vivekananda, there is Paramahansa Yogananda, and there Vishnu Ghosh, Yogananda's brother, ended up founding a very large yoga school, and on and on. And there was cross-pollination, cross-breeding. And so within 50, 60 years, an extremely rich reinvention of yoga happened. Then something extraordinary happened right around 1920, 1930s. So far, yoga had been transmitted directly from teacher to student. It was written down, but in highly symbolic form. There were no detailed texts. Today, you could go to a bookstore, go to Amazon and buy a text on yoga. This was not the case before. In fact, until 1930s, there was really not a single detailed yoga text available. And then Krishnamacharya first wrote the modern book of yoga. It was called Yogasana Guru. It was in Kannada, Yogasanani in Sanskrit. Probably in 1934, it was published. When printing press met yoga, something extraordinary happened. Just like when Gutenberg printed the Bible, it led to the Reformation. When the same printing press began to print yoga books, it led to a renaissance in yoga practice. So what happened in the modern times? Let me walk you through. First, there were three extraordinary books that were written within a 5-year period. In 1957, Swami Vishnu Devananda wrote the complete illustrated book of yoga. And in 1962, Pattabhi Jois wrote Yoga Mala. And in 1966, V.K.S. Iyengar wrote Light on Yoga. These were extraordinary events. For the first time, somebody could pick up a book and start practicing yoga. It was no longer from guru to disciple. The direct Upanishadic tradition was broken for the first time. And like with any innovation, it came with it good things and bad things. I'll walk you through both of them. That's the last part of my talk. But as soon as that happened, by the 70s, yoga was already being taught in the United States. And then within 15 years, it just grew exponentially. And just in the last year, they say that interest in yoga increased by 74% during pandemic times in the United States. Now, there is easily identifiable anywhere between 36 to 48 million people, a full 1 in 10 or 1 in 8 people in the United States have either practiced yoga or practice it in a consistent way. So from 1934, from the first publication of the book until now, it just fostered a big revolution. And then what happened? Well, every time something happens, we cannot say that it's good or bad. It is good and bad. What was good about the modern times? Yoga became more precise. Yoga became the therapeutic benefits of yoga were very deeply explored. It's extraordinary how deeply they've been explored. There were yoga sequences created for almost every imaginable outcome. Yoga was never this precise before. A teacher would teach you and customize it for what you wanted. Now you can pick up a yoga book and say, yoga for diabetes, yoga for cancer, yoga for insomnia. You can say yoga for a basketball player, yoga for a football player, yoga for tennis, yoga for runners, prenatal yoga, postnatal yoga. This level of precision in yoga has been unprecedented. And it's an extraordinary achievement in the last 200 years. But something was also lost. What was lost? Let's look a little bit closely. Pay close attention to this. When yoga was written down, it was received primarily as a physical practice, meaning asanas. Asanas meaning the yoga poses. But the fact that asanas was only a small part of a much larger system, that insight was lost, meaning the esoteric aspects and the spiritual purpose of yoga was de-emphasized. Not because the teachers didn't know. Of course, Iyengar was a great teacher. He knew all of this. So was Pattabhi Jois and Vishnu Devananda and Swami Kriyananda and all the great teachers of yoga. They knew this, but it couldn't be written down. If I teach Kapalabhati pranayama, I would teach it differently even in this Zoom room. I would teach Kapalabhati in 5 different ways, depending on who you are. And I would say for one of you, practice it in the evening in a slow speed. For one of you, practice it in the morning in a fast speed. So there is no one size fits all. So they didn't write it down. But when readers read it, they thought yoga was only a physical practice. So an ancient system that used the body and breath to unlock human potential and to transcend the human condition became a way to simply achieve flexibility, strength, and restful sleep. So you took a broad funnel and narrowed it down to a very small outcome. Let me prove that to you. Look at the number of asanas, yoga poses in each of these texts that I just mentioned. The one to the right is the original text by Krishnamacharya. He teaches 120 asanas. Swami Vishnu Devananda teaches 220. Pattabhi Jois teaches 220. B.K.S. Iyengar teaches 200. Was this always the case? I asked you before. If you practiced yoga in the Himalayas 500 years ago, would you learn Virabhadrasana too? Would you learn Natarajasana? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't, but evidence seems to indicate something different. Let's look at that. Let's go back a few hundred years and look at a text, Gheranda Samhita, that was written in the 17th century. How many yoga poses do you think it has? 32. Let's go back 200 years before that, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, 15th century. How many yoga poses do you think? 15, probably 16, depending on how you count. Let's go back 100 years before that, Shiva Samhita. How many yoga poses? Are you surprised? Just 4. Just 4. 6th century, Goraksha. How many? 2. 3rd century BC, Patanjali, Yoga Sutras. How many? 0. Whereas today, every great master of yoga teaches around 200 poses. What's going on? And it's wonderful. We can't say those 200 poses are bad. How could it be bad? We all reap the benefits of it. But yet, the older masters chose not to teach it. So what is going on? Let's take a look. Yoga is much more than just yoga poses. That's what was lost. So let's see. There's actually one of my students. Yoga begins with something known as Shat Karma. Shat means 6, Karma means action, or Shat Kriya. It's a way of purification. So there are around 6 purification practices. They are very integral to yoga. Nadi, Neti, Dauti, Basti, Kapalabhati, Trataka, Nauli, all of those, these are very integral to yoga. Especially in the West, hardly anybody practices them. Even in India, If you go to Vivekananda Yoga or Bihar School of Yoga, they will teach you. But if you go to a random yoga studio somewhere, very few people teach it. Neti, of course, is more commonly practiced in India, but in general, they don't realize the importance of this. These eliminate toxins and they awaken the internal organs and make us ready for yoga. Then you do the yoga poses. They awaken the inner energy. They give you all the physical benefits. They reduce physical restlessness, increase flexibility, increase strength, and everything. Then you have a set of deeper practices called mudras and bandhas. I'll just call them yogic locks. I don't have time to talk very deeply about them, but just know that they are there. They take our inner vitality, the prana, the breath, and take it deep into where it comes from, some sushumna, deep into the spine. They awaken the digestive fire, create inner stability, calmness. Just Thursday, I was teaching a yoga class where in 20 minutes, we were able to become very peaceful, ready for meditation. And it's very, very good in eliminating restlessness. It's not magic or anything. These are just practices. It's like jogging, bicep curls. It's very, very scientific. So there's nothing mysterious about them. And then at the top of the yogic pyramid, at least Hatha Yoga or pranayama. With this, you can take an elevated heart rate, begin to slow it down, not stop your heart or anything. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying, you can reduce your resting heart rate. Your lung capacity will improve. But more importantly, the mind will enter a deep, deep state of stillness. You'll be amazed how about 3 breathing practices can take you into a deep state of calmness. You see, this combination is yoga, not simply yoga poses. Then how many poses should you learn? Remember, I said we cannot learn history, we have to learn from history. What does history tell us? Not that many. Around 30 is sufficient. After all, the famous texts 300, 400 years ago, they taught a few poses. Here, I'll give you a few examples. Janushirasana, Paschimottanasana, Padahastasana, Bhujangasana, Dhanurasana, Urdhva Dhanurasana, Matsyasana, Mayurasana, Ardhamachendrasana, Setu Bandhasana, Viparita Karani, Sarvangasana, Shirshasana. I'll tell that in English. Jackknife pose, head to knee pose, seated forward bend, cobra pose, bow pose, wheel pose, fish pose, peacock pose, half spinal twist, bridge pose, simple inverted pose, shoulder stand, headstand. Something, it could be a little bit here or there, but you don't need that many. Just these simple poses are enough. This morning, I taught a yoga class for 1 hour, and all we did were 5 poses in 1 hour. So you don't have to jump around and do, you can. That's a wonderful way of doing it too. I'm just saying, don't be caught up in diversity of poses. Pay attention to the depth of your poses. Far more important. And of course, you have the meditative poses. Shavasana, corpse pose. Vajrasana, firm pose. Padmasana, lotus pose. Siddhasana, accomplished pose. And this is it. What about the other poses? Well, they are deeper variations, or they help you prepare to do these poses. They help you with purification. But they are all variations of the key poses. But in addition to poses, incorporate other things. Do a few purification techniques. It's very important. Do a few yoga poses. Also incorporate locks. Any yoga teacher will teach you. If you practice the Ashtanga Vinyasa system of Patabi Jois, locks are already included. They are part of it. We here in VaYU will teach you a few locks. You'll see it as part of your course. The way BK Iyengar has structured his yoga poses, these locks will happen automatically. But be aware of it. It's a very important part. Practice pranayama. Not that many, just 2 or 3 simple ones. But practice a full yoga routine. Just don't do the yoga poses. That's what we learn from history. So this is why if you go back to the ancient texts, you see they didn't teach too many yoga poses, but they taught a lot of purifications. They taught a lot of locks. They taught a lot of pranayama. So by this, yoga was taught in a more balanced way, which in modern times, one of these got emphasized and became better, but we lost the others. So we have to take best of old and new. And that's part of what we emphasize at VaYU as well. How am I doing on time? Oh, good heavens. So yoga in its very deepest expression is an ancient, continuously practiced, evolving system. And in our times, yoga has become widespread but diluted. So we turn to history to have a well rounded practice, but most of all, learn to ask the great big questions of yoga. Don't stop by saying, I go to yoga to get my hamstring stretched. Go to yoga to answer the big questions in life.